Hungarian Folk Tales. Cerceruszka. Once upon a time, there lived a widower who had 2 daughters. His next-door neighbour was a widow who never stopped recommending herself to the man. "Hey, neighbour, take me for your wife. You won't regret it. I will bring up your 2 daughters, and I'll be like a real mother to them." One day, the poor man finally gave in and married the widow next door. But it did not take long for the woman to start treating the girls badly. She tried everything to get them away from the house. She nagged her husband, "Take them both to the forest and just leave them there. Let them perish." That was something horrible for the father's ears, but still, he did as the woman wanted him to. Cerceruszka, that was the name of the elder girl, heard what her father and stepmother were about to do. So she filled her pockets with grain, so she would leave a trail behind. Early next morning, the father took out his 2 daughters. Cerceruszka just kept spilling the grain from her pockets all along the way. When they were deep in the middle of the forest, their father told them, "Well, my girls, I think it's about time to take a rest, because we are all very tired." And the girls went to sleep. When the girls woke up, they started calling their father, but he was already far, far away. "Don't you worry, little sister. We will trace our way back along the grain that I spilled as we came this way." But they couldn't find the grain because the birds had pecked it all up, and the girls just couldn't find their way home. On top of all of that, their stepmother had cursed them before they left. "If you drink from the track of an animal, you are going to change into that animal." As they were walking in the endless forest, the younger girl became thirsty. She spotted the footprint of a cow that was full of clean water. "Sister, oh dear sister, I'm so thirsty, I have to drink." "Don't drink, sister, because you will turn into an animal." A little later, the little girl got left behind and she drank from the footprint of a deer. When Cerceruszka looked back, she saw the little deer running after her. Cerceruszka kept on going forward with the deer following her until she finally found a hollow tree. There she gathered up some dry leaves and made a comfortable bed. One day a young prince was hunting in the forest and he spotted the beautiful Cerceruszka. The prince called after them, "Come on out, you beautiful girl." "I cannot, because I have a dear sister and you want to kill her." "Come on out with the deer. I won't touch her." So Cerceruszka finally came out, and she was so beautiful that the prince was lost for words. When he found his voice again, he immediately asked her to marry him. "Let's get married. I'll be yours and you'll be mine, and we'll live happily forever and a day." He kissed her and embraced her. Then they both got on his horse, and the prince married the girl. Time passed by. The king was on a hunt one day when Cerceruszka gave birth to a son. His name was Little King Andriku. Before I forget what I was going to say, I wanted to tell you that there lived a mean cook in the court who had an ugly daughter. She had always dreamt that her own daughter would be the queen one day, so it was no surprise that she hated Cerceruszka. "Your Majesty, you are so beautiful. There is a pond in the garden. You should go and take a look at yourself." When they walked around the water, the cook suddenly shoved her into the pond. When this was done, the cook woman quickly changed her own daughter's dress and made her lay down in Cerceruszka's bed. Soon the king returned from the hunt. The evil cook told him the good news. "You have a son. His name is Little King Andriku. Just take a look, Your Majesty." The king was very happy and he kissed the baby boy. He was about to kiss his wife, but he was horrified at what he saw. "Oh my goodness, what became of my wife? How could she become as ugly as this?" "It was childbirth that did it to her," explained the cook. The king was sad, but since there was nothing he could do, he finally accepted the change. Each night, Cerceruszka came back and visited the deer in her room. She kept asking, "Is little King Andriku crying?" Of course he is, dear sister. Barren women have no milk. One day the cook's daughter heard this. She was determined to get rid of the deer before it caused her downfall. So she said to the king, "Darling husband, I'm feeling very weak. I will feel no better until I can eat the heart and liver of this little deer." The deer must be killed. As they were sharpening the knife and washing the bowl for her blood, the deer ran out to the pond and called out, "My darling Teterushka, get up from the depths, from the stomach of the big fish, because they want to cut my throat with a knife. They want to catch my blood in a bowl. They want to kill me too." Then Teterushka stepped out of the pond, walked up to the deer, and stroked her gently. She was even more beautiful than before. The king heard and saw everything because he was secretly following the deer. He embraced and kissed Teterushka, who told him everything. The king immediately went to see the cook. He said to the cook, "What would you do to the person who would not hesitate to destroy my wife?" "What? I would have the person tied to a horse's tail and have him dragged through the town." And the old woman and her daughter were treated exactly as the old hag had predicted. The king took Teterushka and the little deer back to the palace, and they all lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. Susa. In the village, there lived a wealthy farmer. He had barns and cellars and attics that were full of goods. Plus, he also had a couple of 100 florins sewn into a sack. However, he also had a lazy, good-for-nothing, stupid wife who was truly useless. Each time the farmer was about to leave for work, he told Susa what to do. Go to the neighbour lady, see what she is doing, and do exactly as she does. So Susa walked over to the neighbour's house, where they were busy bleaching the linen. When she saw this, she went home, took her husband's boots and leather hat into the bleach and let them cook there. They must have been in there for a long time, because when she took them out and she was about to take them to the stream for rinsing, they melted away in her hands. When her husband came home, he asked her, "Well, Susa, what have you been doing all day?" She told him what she had done, and the poor man had to give her a beating. Finally, he told her to pay more attention to the neighbour woman the next time. The next day, the neighbour woman was preparing mash for the pigs in a bucket. Susa saw what she was doing. She ran home, took 10 sacks of barley flour, and threw them all into the well. Susa was very proud of herself. She wanted to tell her husband how much mash she prepared for the animals. As soon as her husband came home, she immediately told him the story. "Do you know what I did today? Mash. The whole well is full of the stuff. There'll be plenty for the pigs." "What? Are you out of your mind, woman?" "That's exactly what I did." So Susan was beaten once more, and her husband told her that if she did this again, he would teach her a lesson she would never forget. On the third day, the neighbour woman was cooking cabbage with bacon. Susa watched her, then went home, sliced up a whole block of bacon. Then she took the bits and pieces to the garden and placed them on the cabbage heads. At noon, her husband came home and saw his dog lying dead by the gate. he asked his wife, "What have you done to this dog, woman? Why did it drop dead?" "The thief ate all the bacon I was preparing for lunch in the garden. That killed him." The man looked into the pantry. The bacon was all gone. He realized what Susa must have done, and he beat her soundly. The man kept all his money in a leather bag under the bed, but he never told his wife, lest she should spend it all. He told his wife that it was an ogre. He scared her by saying that if she did something stupid, the ogre would eat her. One day a travelling potter came their way. Susa wanted to give him the ogre so she wouldn't have to be afraid any longer. But of course, she did not want to give it away for free, so she asked the potter how many pots he would offer in return. Somehow the potter guessed what must be inside the ogre, so he gave her all of his pots. Susa was very happy with the deal. When she was left on her own, she placed the pots on the poles of the fence. Finally, she wanted to arrange the smaller mugs as well, but there was not enough room. Then she found a long pole and started yelling, "All right, you pots, stand in line so there is room for the little ones too." But the pots just didn't want to stand in line, so Susa smashed the pots with her pole. When her husband came home, he immediately saw the fragments on the ground. He suspected that something was wrong, so he asked, "Where did you get these pots, Susa?" "Well, you see, I paid for them with that ogre of yours, so you could never scare me with it again." The man nearly had a fit, but he realized that his wife was mad. The next morning, he sent Susa off to do some reaping, so she couldn't cause any more trouble at home. Susa went out to the field with a sickle, and by 10 o'clock, she harvested 3 sheaves of wheat. She pulled them together and arranged them in a stack. She huddled up in the middle and fell fast asleep. Her husband waited for her at home in vain. "This Susa has suddenly become so hard-working. I'm going to go after her before the work makes her sick." He went out to the field, but however hard he looked, he just couldn't see Susa anywhere. Where could she be? He was about to go home when he finally noticed the 3 sheaves of wheat. He walked up closer and discovered Susa snoring beneath them. It's then that he realized he had to get rid of Susa once and for all. He ran home and brought back a pillow full of feathers and a small pot of honey. He poured the honey all over Susa and then he covered her with the feathers. Susa woke up. She looked at her hands and feet and said to herself, her hands are like Susa's, her feet are like Susa's, but this is not Susa. How could this be? She just couldn't decide whether she was really Susa or not. Finally, she decided she would ask her husband whether his wife was at home. If he said yes, she is home, then she could not be Susa. If he answered no, then she must be Susa without a doubt. When she got to their house, she called out loud, "Listen, John, is your wife at home?" "Of course she is. What's wrong with that?" That was how Susa finally decided that she was not Susa. She started thinking about who she might be, but she just couldn't find out the solution. So in the end, she completely lost her mind. Finally, she ran off, and nobody has ever seen her since. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Fairy from the Oak Tree. Once upon a time, many years ago, there lived the son of the Green King. Now, since he was all alone in the palace, he was bored, and so he picked up his gun and set off hunting. When he came into the forest, he spied a little rabbit, took aim, and was about to shoot. "Excuse me, young prince, one good deed deserves another. Spare me my life." And so he spared the rabbit's life and went further into the forest while the rabbit scampered away. Then he came upon a fox, and the fox said to him, "Don't shoot, young prince. Spare me, and your good deed will deserve another." So the prince spared his life too and went further into the forest. There he found a deer, and the deer also spoke to him, "Spare me my life, and good fortune will bless you." Off you go to the centre of the forest. There you will find an oak tree with 3 branches. Lop off one of the branches, and out will come a fairy. But take some water with you, for she will probably have need of that. So off he went, and he came upon the oak tree, and he lopped off a branch, and a beautiful fairy appeared. "Water, water, please. I need water." The young prince dashed to help, but dropped his flask, and all the water spilled out. The poor fairy died there and then. All he could do was to take her in his arms and carry her home and bury her. Time passed, and the prince set off hunting again, and he came upon the fox. "Now then, kind young prince, for your good deed I'll tell you something good. Go into the forest, cut off another branch of that oak, but bring water with you because you may have need of it." The prince had a flask of wine with him, and he thought that the wine would do. He lopped off the branch. Out came the beautiful fairy. He gave her some wine, but still she went and died. So he picked her up and carried her home in great sorrow and buried her. After mourning her for a while, he once again set off into the forest to go hunting, and he came upon the little rabbit. "Now then, kind young prince, for your good deed I'll tell you something good, but come with me and I'll show you a spring of running water." Then they came upon the oak. "Now lop off that branch." And once again a beautiful fairy came out of the branch and cried, "Water, water, I need water." The little rabbit took the beaker, gave it to the fairy, who drank deep from it, and this time did not die. She then knelt before the young prince and thanked him for freeing her from the oak tree. They embraced and kissed. So now all 3 of them set off home. On their way to the palace, they came to a well and sat down beside it. There the fairy spoke. "I dare not go into your palace wearing fairy clothes. Please go home and fetch me some new robes." Now there was a willow there, and she climbed up into it, and a witch arrived to draw water. She glanced into the well and saw a beautiful fairy. She gazed and gazed but couldn't see anyone in the water. Finally she saw the fairy up in the tree. She called out to her and asked her what she was doing up in the tree. The fairy explained everything to the witch. And what did the witch do but seize hold of the fairy and throw her into the well, and the fairy changed into a beautiful golden fish. Then the witch set off home and fetched her own daughter to the well and made her climb up into the tree. Soon the prince came back carrying clothes. He saw the little rabbit and asked him where the girl was. "I went home to have a bite and a sup, and when I came back, she was up in the tree." So the prince looked around and, right enough, there was a girl in the tree. "Down you come and put these clothes on." And when she came down from the tree, he saw her face, and it was ugly now, when before it had been so beautiful. "Oh, dear prince, I was struck by the rays of the sun, and they changed my face." So the young prince went ahead and gave her the clothes to change into, because he thought she was the fairy. And he took her back home to the palace. One day the witch came to see her daughter, and when she was there she said, "I went by the well, and there I saw in the water a fine golden fish. Now what you have to do is pretend to be ill and tell the prince that the only thing that will cure you is if you have the golden fish caught." The prince would do anything for his princess. So the golden fish was caught and cooked, and she ate some and was cured. A single scale fell from the fish to the ground, and out of it there grew a beautiful golden apple tree, which burst into flower every evening and grew apples by noon the next day, which the fairies came for In the evening, once again the witch went to see her daughter. "What's going on here? You'll have to have that tree cut down or else they'll know that you're not the fairy." So the young queen said to the king, "We have no use of that apple tree. Cut it down so that we won't ever see it again." Now nearby lived a poor man, and he was the one who cut the tree down. And when he was chopping it up into logs, a small chip flew off, and he put it in his pocket and took it home with him. The following day, the man, his wife and daughter went off to work for the king. They set off so early that they had no time to sweep the floors or make their beds. But in the evening, when they got home, they found that the house had been swept clean and all the beds were made. And they wondered who could have come to their house. On the next morning, they set off to work again. But they left behind their daughter, who hid herself. What did she see but the fairy pop out of the chip of wood and start sweeping the house? Then the daughter took tight hold of the chip of wood to stop the fairy returning to it. So that was how they caught the fairy. And the two girls went off to work at the king's court. There they took turns in telling stories. The king asked, "Now tell us another one about what you saw and did in your life." Once upon a time, there was a young prince, and one day he went hunting and he met a little rabbit, a fox, and a deer. "For I am the fairy who the young prince set free from the oak tree." And the prince embraced his fairy tenderly. He had the witch and her daughter tied to a horse's tail, and the prince and the fairy from the oak tree lived happily ever after.